Hello, I want to welcome you all here to the MBAadmit.com Beat the GMAT webinar that we are hosting here with Beat the GMAT. My name is Dr. Shel. That's what the people call me. My full name is Dr. Shel Watts. I am the founder of MBAadmit.com, and today we're going to be talking about overriding a less than ideal GPA or GMAT score. This is always a very, very popular topic because a lot of candidates are concerned about flaws that they may have in their academic record or a GMAT score that came out lower than what they had hoped for. So today we're going to give you an overview of how to take a look at that, how to assess it, and then how to identify a strategy that might work for you. Okay, so before I get into this, I do want to mention that we are very happy that you joined us here today for this webinar. We started a little bit late today, so we will go about 15 minutes over. But after this webinar, feel free to go to our website because we are offering you these specials for your attendance today. One is a free profile evaluation. There'll be a form on our website that you can fill out and send it to us along with your resume. The second is a free ebook about success stories, and it focuses specifically on long shot candidates. Another is a free ebook about frequently asked questions, and so that should be very useful for you. And then finally, there's a $125 coupon for anyone who is seeking to enroll in our services. The coupon is good for enrollments through April 21st, and this coupon goes toward our gold and platinum services. So today's talk, just to give you context, we're going to be touching on four things. I'm going to give a very quick overview of our company, but most of our time will be spent talking about how you can assess your GPA and GMAT score and hopefully assess those accurately so that you understand whether or not you actually have a challenge in those areas. The next part is assessing best practices, so steps that you can take to try to get yourself in a better position if you do have a weakness in the GPA or in the GMAT score. And then finally, some next steps. So quickly to go over our company, we've been advising for over 25 years. We have a whole lot of experience with MBA programs. We've had success to all the top 20 programs. We have a very strong team of advisors, and I'm always very happy to be sharing my expertise. I worked formerly at McKinsey and at Morgan Stanley, and I'm a graduate of Harvard and Oxford. On our website, you can go to see more about testimonials. You'll see, as we describe on our website, some of the advantages that we offer. Our services are priced very low. That is one of the things that you will notice relative to our competitors. We try to make the services affordable. And we have not sacrificed the comprehensive nature of the services. And so we do offer the full range from strategy sessions through to mock interviews. As I said, we've had success at all the top programs. We're happy to provide you with ebooks, so check our website. We'll have quite a number of those being released in the next couple months. We have a newsletter that we hope you'll sign up for to keep you informed about trends, bits of advice that can be very useful for you, as well as profile evaluations, success stories, as well as assessments of the new applications as they are released. Okay, so let's get straight to assessing your GPA or GMAT score. This is very important because sometimes people are not clear about what is a less than ideal GPA or GMAT score. And as you'll hear in the next few minutes, it really does depend on the profile of the candidate. But in general, when the admissions committee is looking at you, it's best if you're able to demonstrate success and excellence in four areas. And so those main areas are professional success, academic success, success in your extracurricular activities, and then if you have a strong personal story, you certainly want to showcase that. So the GPA and the GMAT score are considered part of the academic part of your candidacy. And so ideally, both would be high. And so that would be indicating that you have not only been successful, but that you'll be able to handle their rigorous curriculum. But in the cases where you have a weakness in one of the areas, then you have to start to think about how do you address that so you can still be admitted to one of the top programs that you're targeting. Sometimes people will ask me, well, which is most important of these areas? Usually professional success is most important. That is particularly the case if it's an EMBA candidate. But at the full-time level, for candidates who are in the 20s, for instance, the professional does still tend to be the most important, but academic is also quite important for the full-time MBA candidate, especially if you're targeting the top 10 schools. So a quick frame for how do you override the less than ideal GPA or GMAT score is simply that you're going to try to offer evidence of excellence in the other areas. And so professional, extracurricular, and personal story. You do what you can do to highlight the successes there if you have a deficit in the academic arena. And then the other approach would be to also show other metrics that attest to your strong analytical and academic abilities. And so we'll go through what some of those other metrics can be. But before we get to the strategies, let's first understand what constitutes a low GPA or low GMAT score. As I've said, and I can't say enough times, it's all relative. And so really depending on your profile, you'll have to understand your profile, whether it's overrepresented, whether it's underrepresented, and what that means in terms of whether you have latitude with the GPA or the GMAT score. So that's the very reason why we say less than ideal, because low is so relative based on the profile. And again, you need to understand, are you overrepresented or are you underrepresented? An underrepresented profile is a profile of a candidate that does not apply in large numbers to business school. So for American schools, that might be African Americans, Latino Americans, or women on the whole. And so if it's international, then there are some countries that don't send candidates as often to the United States. So again, you would be underrepresented. An overrepresented profile is a profile where you have very huge volumes of candidates applying, and often that also means that there will be quite a number of very qualified applicants. And so everyone has heard how difficult it can be for the Indian foreign national male engineer, so that's an overrepresented profile. Another broad bucket of overrepresented profile would be the East Asian, usually engineer, but East Asian male on the whole is also usually an overrepresented profile. So once you know whether you're overrepresented or underrepresented, then you need to start to think about, okay, so what does that mean in terms of how much latitude you have to be underneath the average at a school, or even above the average in terms of the GMAT score and the GPA. You need to assess it accurately, because if you know that you have a weakness in the GPA and GMAT scoring, you know that it's pretty notable, then that would imply that you would need to address it explicitly in your application and not just indirectly. And then it also will help you to understand how strong your other credentials will need to be if you're going to have any hope of overriding the less than ideal GPA or GMAT score. So first thing, of course, is the GMAT score weak. Among the factors that will let us know how you're doing is if you are overrepresented, then in what ways? And so is it by citizenship, is it country, is it ethnicity, is it industry, is it gender? And so once you have a sense of basically the broad profile, how they will look at you at the beginning, then you'll know where you need to be. So for instance, if we're talking about Wharton, a candidate who is the East Asian engineer may need to be no less than a 720 on the GMAT score if it's a male candidate, whereas a female candidate of Latino background perhaps could get by with a 700 GMAT score, maybe even a 680. So you're going to need to know the nuances of admissions at each of the schools. Do your best to understand that. And then also based on your profile, understand how you're looking. It's not just a matter of looking at what is the average GMAT score for the school, because there's all these nuances, and those nuances will affect your candidacy. The same is true for the GPA. So if you are strong on the GPA, then that's wonderful. Again, strong is going to be relative, and if you're weak, it's also relative. And so the Indian foreign national male engineer, for instance, if that candidate does not have first class distinction or first class, assuming they went to school in India, that sometimes can be a problem if you're applying to a top 10 university in the United States. That may not be so true if the candidate is female and coming from India. So again, you have to know the nuances of admission. The same thing can hold true if it's an underrepresented minority from America who's applying, say, to London Business School or to INSEAD. It would be very rare to have that sort of candidate applying. So again, that candidate most likely will have latitude in terms of the GPA. This question I get asked a lot by candidates who are trying to convert their GPAs from other systems if they are a foreign national candidate. So a lot of times people go through the process of trying to convert either using the system that is provided by a school on their website or going to some sort of a website that advertises that it can help you learn how to convert your GPA. And when they do the conversion, it looks quite bad. And so then they're worried about, well, does this mean I have no shot at an American university or university in Europe? And it's more important to understand two things. First of all, that conversion sometimes it won't help you because it will look bad, and in fact your GPA was not bad. And so usually a better way to look at your GPA is what was your class rank or what was your percentile in your class. Sometimes you actually may not have that information. I'd say about half of my candidates do have that information, and so then we're much more clear on how the committee will see them. For other candidates who don't know the class ranking and really they were never told explicitly what their percentile was in terms of their class, you generally still have a sense of where you were. And so that information can help you understand, were you at the top of your class and therefore are you prone to do well in our admissions, or were you toward the bottom of the class? But equally importantly, most of the top business schools in Europe and in the United States will have a very long history with your school. And so they will know what your GPA means. So for the candidate who is very concerned, they know that they had a top performance, but when they do the conversion to the 4.0 system, it looks quite bad. You don't need to be overly concerned because, again, the schools have been working with your schools for quite a long time. And so our top business schools in the United States and in Europe will know what the GPA means and will basically react based on their internal metrics and their internal records of what constitutes a strong performance from your particular school. So on the whole, the GPA, a second layer of assessment. Some people actually go through and they think about, okay, what's my profile? Where is my GPA? Where's my GPA relative to what the average was for the school I'm looking at? And it doesn't look so great. Well, the analysis doesn't normally end there. There's actually on the GPA another layer of assessment that you should do. There are what we call extenuating circumstances, and those can vary from very extreme ones to ones that are reasonably acceptable excuses. And if you find that any of these apply that we'll go through in the next few screens, then you should be highlighting that for the committee, because the admissions committee for business school very well may give you much more latitude to have a less than ideal GPA. So what are some of those extenuating circumstances? Let's go through some examples. There is some major event that explains why you had a GPA that was less than ideal. An example would be a candidate who was in college and then had a major health crisis and maybe withdrew from school for a while and then came back. The committee would look at that and understand that that was a pretty major event, and they will understand that the grades immediately before the withdrawal from school could be accounted for from that major event, and as long as the candidate came back and had very strong grades after, then very well you could probably persuade the committee to pay most attention to the grades that occurred after returning to school. So that would cover medical challenge. There are other major events. Perhaps you lost a parent. Again, the committee would look at that and understand an event like that may have a big impact on grades, and therefore it's your job to help direct them to when did that occur, and then look at the grades after that event had happened. Other circumstances. Challenge and circumstances to overcome. There are sometimes cases where someone is the first in their family line to go to college. They don't have mentors, they've never been in this environment, they don't actually have the skills to succeed right away, and that's something that they learn over time. Someone like that needs to present the story to the committee, and very well, if they can see an upward trend, they may be open to being more lenient on the GPA. There are some people who have to work their way through school financially, and if there are a lot of hours involved, 20 hours, 25 hours, 30 hours a week, the committee will understand that of course will have an impact on your GPA. And so again, you should be presenting that to the committee. Here's another example, a highly competitive college. Now, the top business schools in the United States and in Europe are familiar with the top schools and which ones are very highly competitive. And so for a student coming out of Yale, they may be more lenient on what that GPA was relative to someone who came out of a much lower ranked college. A very difficult major. When you are applying from a school that is well known and the majors are also well known among the business schools, then if you were in a very difficult major as an undergraduate, they will understand if that GPA is lower than they might want to accept for someone who was in a softer or an easier major. So again, it's your job to point that out. Participation in varsity level sports. This is seen as an excuse oftentimes because on the whole, business schools look at a person who is in varsity sports as doing something very admirable for their school. They're representing their school in sports. And so for that candidate, and this is not applying to intramural sports or to sports that are played within a college, it's when it's university to university, then oftentimes the admissions committee will understand that someone devoting that much time to preparation for a sport may have a lower than ideal GPA. And then finally, some people have a very just hard first year, and then the grades get better. And so in that case, you should be drawing to the attention the reasons for that rough start, and then make sure that you're highlighting the improvement of the grades that happened. So another question I'm often asked is, well, so what if my less than ideal GPA is a product of my high involvement in other college activities aside from varsity sports? And I know that most candidates will hope that, well, maybe that will be treated the same as varsity sports. It's actually not the case. In most cases, the business schools will not look at that in the same way as a varsity sport. And so the varsity sport is seen as a bit of an exception. In most other cases, the impact of extracurricular activities excuse is not one that the schools will find to be justifiable in terms of the fact that you had a lower GPA, because they will think that you should have prioritized better than that. And so examples of non-varsity sport extracurriculars would be president of a student club, intramural sports, if you were a senator on the student body, or if you're a marathon runner, all those things, the committee would say, we're thrilled to see that you have done that, you've achieved excellence in the extracurricular arena. However, your first priority should have been academics in college. The exception being varsity sports. Okay, so hopefully you'll start to use some of those bits of information to assess more accurately how strong your GPA is and how strong your GMAT score is. So in the event that you do have a less than ideal GPA or a less than ideal GMAT score, what sorts of things can you do to override that? That's what we'll talk about in this next section. So things to do. I'm going to go through 10 best practices, and this is number 1. Basically, redirect attention to your areas of strength. You do this, and you can do it very skillfully through the use of the essays, recommendations, resume, and the application form. And so in all of those, you should be striving to, showcase the professional success, showcase leadership in the community or excellence in extracurricular activities, and demonstrate that you've had very strong analytical skills that you were applying after college. And so you have to just try extra hard in these elements of the application to give such a strong impression that the committee is willing to look a little bit away from the GMAT score or the GPA. Another way to summarize it is, in this second point, your aim is to make the less than ideal GMAT score or the less than ideal GPA appear to be the only weakness in your profile or your candidacy. So when redirecting attention, again, these are the areas that you could focus on: professional successes. Wonderful if you've had promotions, awards, or responsibilities that are advanced for your tenure. your extracurricular record, it's even better if within the record you have examples of leadership. Your personal story, some people have a very, very strong personal story. And that can vary from someone who, worked their way up from poverty and are the first to go to college to someone who came out of a rural area, whether in the United States or abroad, and worked their way to a top college. There's all sorts of variations. Even for the candidate who is not disadvantaged in terms of economics, there's often a way that you can pull out a very strong personal story, and then that should be a very important part of your application. And then again, long-term goals, looking to the future and away from the past, can be a very effective strategy for shifting attention, and again can sometimes help persuade the committee that you have a great deal of potential and that they should very strongly consider you for admission. Another best practice is recommendations. One thing I cannot underscore enough is that recommendations have a huge impact on admissions outcomes. In my opinion, they're weighed as heavily as the essays for the top MBA programs. And so it's your opportunity to use that content to help your recommendation writers address indirectly the GMAT score or GPA. And so it's simply emphasizing how strong your analytical skills are, how you bring such fresh ideas and valued perspectives that can help to offset a weakness in your academic profile. Number 3, establish yourself as among the best in your field. At the beginning of this talk, I was mentioning that oftentimes the professional is by far the most important criteria of professional success in terms of getting into the top MBA programs. And so knowing that, you want to showcase the evidence that you have of the excellence. And so awards in the workplace, high performance rankings, promotions, advanced responsibilities, all of those can help to establish success professionally, and so you should be showcasing that in the essays, through the recommendations, and on the recommendation form, and also, of course, on your resume. Number 4, use a high GPA or high GMAT score to your advantage if you have a weakness in the opposite category. So if you have a high GPA but your GMAT score is low, you should be trying to draw the attention to the GPA, and then be trying to make sure that they're considering that as being the more accurate metric of your abilities and your potential. And then the same with the GMAT score, that if you have a high GMAT score but a less than ideal GPA, you should hopefully be trying to showcase the GMAT score more in the application. Sometimes people will ask me, okay, so well, what's easier to do, override a low GPA or override a low GMAT score? And I think that most people are actually surprised by the answer. The answer is actually it's easier to override a low GPA than it is a low GMAT score. And I assume that the reasoning is that the GMAT is occurring in most cases much more closer to the time that you're applying, and so it gives a more fresh perspective of where you are in terms of abilities. And then also, the more time that you've put between your GPA and applying, then it's just a much less useful metric for the school. So in most cases, having the high GMAT score will help you, and it's easier to override the lower GPA than it is to override a low GMAT score. So number 5, consider taking the GRE. This is applying for people who have a low or less than ideal GMAT score. Now, this is a subject of a lot of debate these days. So how do the admissions committee look at the GRE? Do they think of it as good? And then when do you know when to try to switch over to the GRE? So to answer both of those quickly, some candidates take the GMAT score 7 times and they're still not getting above a 580. So if that is a candidate and they really want to go to the top 10 school in the USA, most likely you're going to get cut without an interview with a 580 GMAT score if you're applying to the top 10 MBA programs. So at that point, you really don't have a choice except to change to the GRE and just see if you get a better score. And I've certainly had candidates who do that, and they start scoring in the mid-80s in percentiles on the GRE. And it's much better to at least try with that sort of a higher score with the GRE than to go in with a low GMAT score. And so some people are worried, well, do the schools think of it as good? Do they look down on the GRE? And in my opinion, it really is based on the candidate. So for the candidate they really, really like, and they really want to admit you, but they just don't want to have a low GMAT score, you give them the GRE, that's a good score, and that you've given them a reason to say yes. If it's another candidate where it's just their reaction to the candidate is so-so, and they've got a lot of other candidates who have similar profiles that are qualified, coming in with the GRE may not persuade them, and they may take the attitude like, well, this person probably just didn't do well on the GMAT, and here we have all these other people who are qualified and have high GMATs. Let's just go with them. And so it really does depend on the profile, but the point is a lot of people don't have a choice, that after 6 or 7 tries on the GMAT, if you simply cannot get it up, then sometimes your only hope is to switch over to the GRE. And people, again, they ask me, have you seen successes with the GRE? And absolutely yes. So one of my candidates just emailed me the other day and had mentioned that he had gotten into 2 of his top 3 schools with the GRE. In the past, we've seen a consortium applicant succeed and get a full scholarship to Cornell with the GRE. And then non-traditional candidates may have a little bit more latitude to do the GRE because they're not mainstream business candidates. They might be coming from nonprofits, they might be coming from other fields like law. And so in that case, the committee from the beginning may have been more open to seeing a GRE score from that candidate, but certainly we've seen many success stories with non-traditional candidates with the GRE score. Number 6, consider securing a second degree. Now this one is an option taken by very few candidates, and understandably so, because it's very time intensive and it's very resource intensive. And so someone has to be willing to take a year or 2 years to go get that other degree before they're applying, and then sometimes they even feel that they have to work after that second degree, which is not always the case. But it is an extremely effective strategy. So for example, if you had a 1.7 GPA in college, and then you know that you're most likely not going to get into a top full-time program with a 1.7 GPA, regardless of how many compensating factors you have, then that candidate may say, let me just go enroll in a small state school program, get my 3.7, 3.8, 3.9, and then I have something else to show the committee that is a whole degree. And it just gives the admissions committee something to look at and say, okay, that's the degree we're going to consider. And it basically makes the 1.7 GPA and that prior degree irrelevant for the discussion of admissions. And I have seen that be very, very effective for candidates who had extremely low GPAs. One example, a couple of years back, I had a Middle Eastern candidate who had quite a low GPA in college, and then he went and got a 1-year degree with a 3.8 GPA, and he essentially got into all of his target schools with that second degree. And I see that over and over again. We had plenty of candidates last year who had second degrees that were quite strong. So for instance, if we had an Indian foreign national who had a mediocre performance in their college in India, but had gotten a scholarship to one of the American universities and had a 3.8, it's a whole new ball game, because the 3.8 at the master's level will, in most cases, you'll be able to persuade the committee to focus on that degree and not on the prior degree. Number 7, consider building an alternative transcript. So let me explain what an alternative transcript is. That is not, it doesn't mean you have to go get another full degree. This is a lesser approach in the same sort of line, but it's essentially when someone goes, they locate a reputable school that offers business relevant courses, usually online, and then they will enroll in that and take, 3 to 6 courses, get A's in all those courses, and then present the grades to the admissions committee and say, this is my most recent work, and these grades are much more accurate in terms of showing where I am academically and analytically. And so this is an approach that can be taken, but the 3 things of caution, or 3 things to consider, is 1, don't overestimate the impact of this. This can be highly effective, but it really depends on the profile of the candidate. And so again, if someone is overrepresented and the committee is just staring at thousands of other applicants of a very similar profile who have the strong GPA and GMAT, then trying to overcome a low undergraduate record with this method most likely is not going to work for that candidate. In another situation where you have someone underrepresented who has years of success professionally and then they take some of these courses about 3 years out from school, from college, then because that person is underrepresented, they're showing success in many of the other areas besides academic, and now they present, say, 5 courses with all A's at a strong university's online extension school. That can have an impact in that case. So it really just does, it depends on the candidate. So whenever someone asks me, will an alternative transcript help me, I really do need to see all the details of the candidacy and the profile to give a response. The other things to consider if you do think it will be useful for you is how many courses to take. 6 is better than 3 because it just shows a sustained level of achievement if you have A's in all those 6 courses. And then you want to do ideal courses. And so if you have a weakness in the quant area, you need to take quant courses. If you're coming from a totally non-traditional background, then maybe a broader mix of business courses would be ideal for you, but just make sure that you are taking courses that are value added for your profile. Number 8, certifications. I'm often asked, if I have a bunch of certifications, can that help to offset my GPA? And again, it matters by profile. It also matters in terms of what is the certification you're talking about, because certain ones are much more prestigious than others. The CFA is amazingly prestigious. It's very difficult to pass all 3 levels, and a minority of candidates have passed all 3 levels at the time of applying. So if you have already passed all 3 levels, that will be taken as a sign of tremendous persistence, commitment, strong abilities, and so that should impact your application. And so again, things to consider: whether it will work in your case, because again, if you're overrepresented, this will have a lesser impact. The prestige of the certification, the relevancy given either the area that you're working in or the area that you want to go to. It has to be relevant to that. And then again, the more rare the certification, so the harder it is to get, then the greater it will impact your application positively. Number 9, let time work for you. Sometimes, people are a little impatient, and so say they were undergrad and they had a 2.9 and they really want to get into a top 5 business school. If you're applying 2 years after college, it's possible that you get in if there's a mix of compensating factors that works for you well enough. But in most cases, the more time you put between that college record and applying, the better for you, simply because you start to get redefined in terms of your professional successes. And so you should always be thinking, if you do have a low GPA, how much time is ideal to give between having received that GPA and applying to school. A real life example, I had a candidate who was very mediocre in his performance, had no awards whatsoever in college, no scholarships, and it was a no-name school. It was for, I would say probably bottom 20% of colleges. That's where the ranking was in terms of the U.S. rankings. And so it was not an impressive school. It was a very unimpressive performance. He put 7 years of working experience in between that degree and applying. And in the meantime, he made sure to get a lot of professional successes and have that strong record for him. And then he really took care, we worked with him to really draw out this backstory that he had. He had actually applied for 4 years out from college without our assistance and had been rejected from Harvard. And so then he came to us at the 7-year mark, and relative to the prior application, he had not highlighted his personal story at all. And he just did not shine the light on all these other compensating factors. And so what we did with him was make sure that happened, and then he had an admission to Harvard. So time can work for you, and the ideal amount of time will depend on your profile, how low was your GPA, and what sorts of credentials can you pick up in 3 years, 4 years, 7 years. And then finally, number 10, when you are thinking about your GMAT score and your GPA, and you have decided that there is a weakness there, and it's big enough that you need to address it, the first thing is how do you address it? Is it directly or is it indirectly? Now, if it's big enough, if the deficit is large enough, you need to address it directly and not just indirectly. If you're doing it indirectly, you're doing it just by shifting the attention away, making sure your recommendations are super strong, making sure your resume just nails everything, the application form is super strong. So indirectly kind of showing the strength where the community might have concerns. When you have to directly address it and just say, hey, look, I know you may be concerned about this, then you do that in various places. Optional essay is a very key place to do that. You may sometimes do it in the body of the essays, depending on what the essay mix is and whether there's even an optional there to work with. Recommendations can explicitly address it. And then there's sometimes on the application form, there's a space where you can fill in the information about why it was that your GPA or your GMAT might be lower than what would be ideal. So just make your strong, well-reasoned choice as to whether to address this directly or indirectly, and then make sure you're pinpointing where you will do that. Finally, instances when you cannot override a less than ideal GPA or GMAT score. People will often ask me, is there a case where you cannot override? And yes, there are cases. So that usually occurs when you have both a low GPA and a low GMAT score, because basically in the two major areas that the school is looking at to see, are you qualified to be at the school? Have you earned your position at the school? Can you do the rigorous work, and can you be successful in the future? Both of the major metrics are low, and so that's going to be a huge thing to be working against. People can do it, but it's much harder to do that, to override both a low GPA and a low GMAT score. If your profile is hyper competitive, you're thoroughly overrepresented in the profile, and that profile tends to be highly qualified, then in some of those cases, overriding a low GMAT score, for instance, will be very, very difficult. And then finally, if you have other notable weaknesses besides either a low GPA or a low GMAT score, so for instance, a 36-year-old who has a low GMAT score trying to get into a top 3 MBA program most likely won't happen, even if there are a lot of compensating factors, simply because they have already aged out in the viewpoint of a lot of the schools. A 36-year-old should be in an MBA program and not in a full-time MBA program. And so you're working against two major obstacles. And so in that case, in many cases, that would not be a situation that you can override. And then another example, an Indian foreign national male engineer with a 660 GMAT score trying to get into a top 10 university in the USA. Again, that is a very hard sell simply because the pool is so qualified and the GMAT scores are so high for the qualified applicants. And so again, trying to work against that is very hard. So there are some cases where it cannot be done. I would encourage you never to assume that you're one of those cases. Just make sure that you get a really good assessment by someone that you have confidence knows admissions really well, and then let them guide you about whether it's worth trying to override it, whether your case really cannot likely get a good outcome, and then start to help you think about alternatives. But there are alternatives. That is the good news for the person who cannot override the weaknesses. So what are those alternatives? Most executive EMBA programs, so EMBA programs, are easier to get into than the full-time programs. And it's simply because oftentimes the candidate is older, and therefore the most important criteria is professional success. And so with a low GPA, oftentimes you're able to get into EMBA programs at very prestigious schools, MIT, Kellogg, University of Chicago, Haas, Wharton, Columbia. They all have wonderful EMBA programs. And some of those EMBA programs do not ask for the GMAT score. So if you have a low GMAT score, then they will never see it because they don't require the GMAT score. And so for the case of someone who's low in GPA and in the GMAT, they will never see the GMAT. So your weakness in theory can be confined to just one factor, which is the GPA. And so again, that just means it's better for you in the admissions process. In part-time programs also, you usually have a little bit more latitude on the GMAT score and the GPA. And again, there are some schools that have outstanding part-time programs, and so among those would be Haas and University of Chicago. So those are alternatives as well. Here are some examples of folks who ended up having to go alternative paths, and they are very, very happy with their MBA experiences. And so contrary to popular belief, you can be quite young and get into an EMBA program. And so I had a candidate who was 25 years old but had been a very successful entrepreneur, and unfortunately undergrad he had a pretty low GPA, and his company had not yet developed to where I think it needed to be for him to override the GPA to get into a top full-time program. He was just set on getting into a top 5 school, and so he did the EMBA route and he gets in. So again, many people think a 25-year-old can't get into an EMBA, but that's not true. So you don't have to be a 33-year-old or a 37-year-old to be in a top EMBA program. You do need to write up your application well, though, to make it clear that you have the experience to contribute, and so that is one thing that we helped him to do. We have these other examples: someone who gets into the MIT's EMBA program with a low GMAT score, someone who, for Indian foreign male engineer, who gets into a great school with a 620 GMAT score. And then, it's not unusual for me to see folks with 2.7 GPAs get into various EMBA programs, but in this particular case, I wrote about the 34-year-old American woman who gets into the Booth EMBA program. So there are great alternatives, and you can always consider those if you simply are not able to override a low GPA or a low GMAT score. Next steps. Again, I definitely welcome you to visit our website and make use of these offers for you. In the next few minutes, I'm going to take questions. So if any of you have questions, we're going to go about 15 minutes beyond the original end time because we started a bit late today. So definitely send in your questions and I'll try to address some of those. And again, just to remind you, please feel free to sign up for our newsletter on our website so we can keep you informed of tips and trends and all the good stuff you need to know in order to do well in the admissions process. And this is our contact information, so please feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to give you feedback on your profile and to see what we can do to help you in your admissions quest. All right, so I'm at a point where I'm okay to start taking some questions. All right, I'm beginning to see some of these questions, so let's just take a look at some of these. Well, I see one general question here about how do you know how the admissions committee is going to be looking at you? You can do that through various ways. There are many opportunities on Beat the GMAT to get your profile assessed. We're happy to do that for you at mbaadmit.com. And so that gives you a sense of how you might be received, maybe some challenges that you have that you want to try to address before applying. And then there's also directly the blogs that you will have, again, on Beat the GMAT, where you can sort of try to see what the committee is saying about trends for their school in terms of admissions and so forth. So, take the opportunity. There's a lot of information online, and just do your homework very, very well so that you're prepared and you have more of a sense of how you will be received. Okay, I have another question here. If a student has below a 2.0 but a decent GMAT score of 720, do they have a chance of getting admitted? It really depends on the whole story. A case like that where the 2.0 is quite low, and in many cases that would just be too low for the committee to be considering if it was a top 10 school, then I need to hear the whole story, like why was there a 2.0 and so forth, what is the work experience, and then again know what sort of schools you're targeting. You may not be looking at top 10 schools, it may be top 30 schools. And so the 710 is a wonderful GMAT score, and so that is going to give a very strong indication that you have strong abilities. So I would not give up on full-time programs. And if you're talking about EMBA, then certainly you would have options there. Okay, I have another question about what is the lowest GPA you've gotten into a top 5 program? I actually can't, I'd have to go do my research on that, but one recent that I can tell you about is a 2.1 that got into Columbia. And that candidate did everything right. So he came to us early. We were able to strategize with him in terms of what was the right time to apply, how to redirect attention to his strengths. He actually had an amazingly wonderful set of professional achievements and how to showcase that in the resume, the essays, and the recommendations. We put together the application and just honed it over and over. And so when he submitted, and he looked at it with a very good attitude. He said, I know the odds are that I won't get admitted, and I'm okay. I just want to put together the best application, just see. And I actually I felt pretty strongly he would get an interview because he had so much going for him. I didn't know if he would get in. He got in. I was thrilled, and it's wonderful to see a success story like that. So you really, your GPA on its face should not make you disqualify yourself. Just get really good feedback about, do you have enough compensating factors, and is it worth trying? Someone else is asking, well, how much is adequate time between graduation and a low GMAT score um, low GPA to get into a top school? And so this participant didn't actually ask about top school. So the answer is really all over the map, because if it's a top 10 school, then you need at least, if it was a low GPA, I would give yourself 3 to 4 years, not just 2. And if it is a lower ranked school, so you're looking at top 20, you may not need to wait so long. And then again, what was the reason for the low GPA? And so you have to get a really good analysis of your circumstances and then get some good advice about when to apply. Here's another question about EMBA. This person is saying it's very expensive. It doesn't require that you get sponsored by your employer. I would say that many EMBA programs are not actually that much more expensive than an MBA program. So you should look school to school and take a look at the financials there. And these days, the requirement for employer sponsorship is not as strongly emphasized as a couple of years back, simply because more and more candidates are seeing that as a very attractive option, and for many different reasons. One, they're just attracting much more a much higher quality candidate, and therefore the reputation of the degrees has gone up tremendously in the last few years. The programs have gotten much stronger, and so these programs are more in demand. So it's not in the interest of the school to require that an employer sponsors you, because some people won't be able to get that. So why turn away a great candidate? So you should go school to school and just take a look about how much that employer sponsorship is emphasized, and don't overestimate it. The vast majority of my candidates who apply successfully to the EMBA, I would say 85% are not sponsored by their companies, and so don't let that be something that stands in your way. I'm looking over a couple more of these questions. So here's another question about, okay, if I apply, I assume this is an American saying, if I apply to a program abroad, would I potentially become an underrepresented candidate? The answer is yes. So for the American applying to London Business School, you were very likely going to be treated as underrepresented because a lot of Americans don't apply to London Business School. And for INSEAD, you have usually they're requiring the 2 language requirement, which a lot of Americans can't speak a second language, so you're even more of a minority in that situation. So there are, yes, programs abroad where, because you will be treated as an underrepresented minority, you may have better odds. I would also, though, for Americans, encourage you not to assume you're not underrepresented, because even someone who is of at a broad level in an overrepresented profile. Many times when I start to assess the profile, I'm seeing things that can make you seem much more underrepresented, even though you're part of that broader profile. And so you need to make sure you're not overlooking something that could be pretty important in admissions. Um, a couple more. Do schools look at how many times you've taken the GMAT score? Yes, they do. And I don't think it impacts you negatively. I think that if you, and I say that meaning if you take it 5 times and on the fifth try you get a 720, most schools are not going to hold against you the fact that you took it 4 times prior. Now, if you take it 5 times and you get a 680 and then you present a top 10 school a 680, they usually ask you how many times did you take it. They don't ask you the scores, but if they see you took it 5 times and you're presenting a 680, then they will assume the best you had was 680, and the fact that you took it five times means that that 680 is accurate for you. So that's kind of the only scenario where I think taking it works against you when you've taken it that many times. But if you take it many times and then you get a great score, the school is not going to penalize you for the fact that you took it multiple times. Someone is asking, does the EMBA offer fewer opportunities as compared to full-time? Well, I'm only going to spend a little time on this. I think I want to probably address this in my forum. So if some of you want to leave some emails about this in my forum, some posts, I'm more than happy to address those. And we're actually also about to issue a lot of blogs about EMBA programs. But the range of options can be sometimes more restrictive, and then sometimes the schools prefer to see someone who's going to go back to the same company. So it's, in theory, it is less useful for career switchers. However, again, some people are in situations where they have to look at the EMBA simply because they may just be too old. If you're 38, a lot of the top MBA programs that are national may not consider a 38-year-old very seriously. Regional schools may, so Duke and schools that are more regional may consider someone older. But for the candidate who really wants to go to Columbia or really wants to go to Wharton, at that point, you may have aged out, so you just don't have an option but to look at the EMBA. So, go do your homework, because in my opinion, EMBAs are just going to keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And the reason is because many people don't figure out until later that they want the MBA. Some people, by the time they know it, even if they're younger, they're 27, they don't want to move, they've got families, they like their company. And so there's a lot of reasons why quality candidates choose an EMBA. So, I think it's a fine option, and I think you should look at it if your circumstances mean that that's going to give you the school that you're seeking. I'm reading through some more of these questions, so give me a moment to choose one. Okay, here's a question. When building an alternative transcript, is it better to take the courses in person or online? And most people simply can't do it in person because, you've got very busy careers. So most candidates that I see who do the alternative transcript, they are online courses. The key is to get to a really strong university. And so there are some universities in the UC system in California that offer online programs, and they're what they call continuing education. So they're not formal degrees, and they cost, in the hundreds of dollars, not very much. So you might pay $300, $400. And so that's an option. It's viable. It's online. And so, yes, the online version can be very effective. And I see most people do it online. So I don't necessarily think that doing it in person would give you more of an advantage than online. Someone is, there's one question here where someone's saying, I have multiple extenuating circumstances. And so I'm an athlete, I was a first generation student, I paid my way through school, I had family problems. Okay, and so those are a lot of different ones. You don't necessarily have to choose just one to present to the committee, but you need to just write about it coherently. Um, and the tone matters because you don't want to be sounding like someone who, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me, and look at this, horrible set of things that's just too big, because the tone may be damaging to you. So you just need to write about it in the right tone and concisely, and and then start to shift the attention away to the areas of your strength. I'm reading a few more of these questions. I have a how many times is too many for the GMAT score, which is similar to a question I answered a few minutes ago, but I think the more relevant thing, is, especially if someone is thinking about GREs, is at what point do I say, okay, I've tried enough times, this is not working out with the GMAT score, and I need to start looking at the GRE. I would say 5 times might get you there if you're stuck and you just can't get above a 620, say, on the GMAT score. And again, yes, some schools think the GMAT is much better than the GRE because they have more candidates with the GMAT. They know what it means. But again, if you're trying for a top school and then you try to present a 620 and you're overrepresented, you're not most likely going to get very far. And so in that case, you just don't have a choice but to try to switch over to something else. And so again, I had one candidate who has a GRE score and has gotten into most of the schools he's applied to. He's told me that one of the schools where he did get an interview has told him, at least one of the interviewers told him offline that, look, we don't really like to see the GRE that much, but at the same time, he's gotten the interview and it looks promising for admission. And he already has about 3 other schools, one of them with full scholarship. So for him, the GRE is working out so far. There's this one school which is pretty highly ranked that has told him offline through one person that they tend not to like the GRE as much. But he's still in the running for that school, so that can give you a sense of how the GRE is received. Another candidate is saying, how do you know if your profile is overrepresented or underrepresented in top 10 MBA programs? And one, it depends on where. Is it USA or is it abroad in Europe or something? And so secondly, you can go to chat rooms and try to see what people are saying there. And then you can try to connect with a profile evaluation with a consultant that you believe is qualified, has seen a lot of applications, and can guide you well, because you want to know that the person has really knows what they're talking about. Because I do get candidates who have been in these chat rooms a lot, and they come to me with these ideas, and I think it's completely off. And so I may think they have fantastic opportunities and options, and they've sort of convinced themselves they don't. So you do need to make sure that you're talking to someone who has had a lot of success and who knows admissions really well. But that is very important information to know. Okay, another question. If you take both the GMAT and the GRE, do you have to submit both scores? That is something that's very school specific, and so you can go right now, because the applications are still up for round 3 of this year, so you can go onto the websites and even sign up for an application, take a look on the online form and see what they're requiring. But most schools do not ask for both that I've been working with, but there are some that do. And so some of them explicitly say, if you're giving us a GRE score, did you take the GMAT, and what's your score? But it's a minority of schools that do that right now. And so usually that means that if you had a GMAT score that was low, you don't have to present it, you just have to present one of the standardized tests. And so therefore, if your GRE is miles stronger, you should be presenting most likely the GRE score. Okay, I have time for about 2 or 3 more questions. So let's just take a look and see which ones I have not yet responded to. Does MBA Admit offer services to international students? Yes, of course. I mean, a lot of our clients are abroad. So you can go to our website, and we actually have a link on there about all the countries that we've worked with, students from those countries. And it's extensive, and we haven't updated it lately, so there's probably some countries on there that we've worked with that are not on the list. But we have a very large portion of candidates who are international. our pricing is a lot lower, and part of the reason that we price so much lower than our competitors are that, we know that these fees, even where we price, can be very hard for international candidates to afford. And so we're just trying to make the service accessible to as many different types of candidates as possible. And our eye is on the international bucket when we're pricing, so we're trying to make it still affordable for people coming from countries outside the United States. And so yes, we do work with international students. Okay, let's try to find two more questions. Someone is asking, would a second bachelor's be okay to obtain? Yes, in theory. However, that's a long commitment. So you would just decide, do you want to do that? In most cases, that would be a 3-year commitment at least. And so you'd have to just decide, is that what you want, or is it easier just to find a 1-year degree in something specific that's relevant? Okay, I'm going to try to find one last question here. Okay, well, here's a question about low GMAT scores and MBA programs. And so how low can you be? And again, that is profile dependent. As I said before, a lower GMAT is harder to override than a low GPA. And there have been some cases where someone has come to me and they have a GMAT score that to me looks like they will be out of range for school. And if they've taken it multiple times and simply cannot get it up and don't really want to try the GRE, we will just put together the best application possible and just see what happens. And we do always have the success stories where the odds were fundamentally against the person. So the Indian, foreign national who has a 660 and applies to Duke, usually that's going to put you out of range, and there can be successes in that case. The candidate who has a 560 and applies to INSEAD, again, put everything together right and show strength in other places academically, that can be possible. So what I would encourage is that you're not trying to override weaknesses of that degree needlessly. So if you can get up the GMAT score, you should be trying to do that. But there are just some cases where people just can simply not get that score to budge. And in which case, everything else, you should be trying to just put it together in an exceptional way so that hopefully you will be able to override those weaknesses in your profile. All right, well, I think I will end things here today. I do want to remind you to, take a trip back to our website and take advantage of these offers that we're giving folks who attended with us today. And definitely we will be issuing that success stories ebook very soon, and we'll be very happy to send that to you. And of course, again, sign up for our newsletter. It has been wonderful being here again with Beat the GMAT. So thank you for attending, and stay in touch with us. Feel free to send an email or post a question in our forum on Beat the GMAT.